Steve McQueen hated funerals. Everyone who knew him knew this. He had attended almost none in his adult life, not out of disrespect, but out of something more private, a specific resistance to the ritual of public grief that the people around him had long since stopped trying to argue him out of. When Bruce Lee died in Hong Kong on July 20, 1973, McQueen's people told him about the funeral in Seattle. He didn't hesitate. He got on a plane. He went to Seattle. He carried the coffin. "I felt like saying goodbye to a friend," he told M. Uehara afterward. "That's why I went up there, to pay my respects and to try to make it easier on the people around him." For a man who had spent his adult life not going to funerals, this was everything. This is the story of how the most famous movie star in America and a Chinese martial artist with no Hollywood career became something that neither of them had words for, and what it cost each of them to lose it. To understand the friendship between Steve McQueen and Bruce Lee, you first need to understand what each of them was in 1967 when they met. McQueen was 37 years old. He was, by most measures, the biggest movie star in America. Bullitt, The Great Escape, The Magnificent Seven, The Thomas Crown Affair. He had made films that defined a generation's idea of what a leading man looked like, how he moved, what he conveyed without saying anything. He drove cars at speeds that frightened professional racing drivers. He did his own stunts. He had the specific, dangerous charisma of someone who genuinely did not care whether anyone in the room was impressed, and who was therefore impossible not to watch. He had grown up hard, an absent father, an abusive stepfather, a reform school at 14 where he had learned not to trust institutions and had discovered, among other things, that he could fight. He had been in the Marines. He had driven motorcycles and raced cars with a consistency that suggested he was not entirely sure he wanted to arrive wherever he was going. He had become famous anyway, or maybe because of it, the rebellion channeled into a persona that audiences responded to because it was not entirely a persona. Marshall Terrill, his biographer, described him as the epitome of yin and yang, sweet and scary, caring and selfish, cocky and insecure, funny and humorless, generous and thrifty. He was also, by Terrill's specific assessment, too paranoid to make friends easily. You couldn't want a friendship with McQueen because he was too paranoid. He had to want something from you. He had to want it badly enough to let his guard down for long enough to discover that there was a person on the other side of the transaction worth knowing. Bruce Lee was 27 years old. He was out of work. The Green Hornet had been canceled after one season. No major studio would give him a leading role. The explanation he heard repeatedly, that American audiences were not ready for an Asian leading man, was the same explanation he had been hearing since he arrived in America 8 years earlier, and it had not gotten less insulting with repetition. He was teaching private martial arts lessons in Los Angeles to pay his bills, charging $100 an hour to clients who could afford it, and he was good enough at it that the list of people who wanted lessons included some of the most recognizable names in Hollywood. He had a wife and a young child. He had ideas and ambitions that were considerably larger than his current circumstances. He was the kind of person who had always believed, on the basis of what he knew about his own abilities, that the barriers in front of him were temporary, that the people who told him no were describing their limitations, not his.
He and McQueen were, underneath the surface differences of race and background and current status, remarkably similar in their essential natures. Both had been street fighters as teenagers. Both had grown up in conditions that required a specific kind of toughness to survive. Both had a relationship with authority that ranged from skeptical to actively hostile. Both were driven by an ambition that they did not moderate or disguise, and both, in their different ways, were in the process of becoming something that the world had not yet fully recognized. They met through Jay Sebring, the the celebrity hairstylist who had attended the Long Beach International Karate Championships in 1964 and had been so impressed by Bruce Lee's demonstration that he had mentioned it to television producer William Dozier, which had led to the Green Hornet. Sebring was friendly with both men, one of the nodes through which the specific social network of 1960s Hollywood connected different worlds. McQueen became one of Bruce's private students. Their first session was in 1967 in the well-appointed home gym that McQueen had built in his house, which reflected both his commitment to physical fitness and his preference for training in controlled, private settings rather than in public dojos or studios where other people would watch. Bruce Lee was immediately impressed by McQueen in a way that had nothing to do with his fame. He was impressed by his work ethic. McQueen, who was known outside the gym for hard living, the cars, the motorcycles, the drinking, the restless energy that had not settled into any stable direction since his childhood in reform school, was inside the gym a different person. He trained without complaint. He pushed through pain. He did not ask for the session to stop when he was tired. He did not modify his effort based on how he was feeling. On one occasion, documented by Matthew Polly in his biography, McQueen cut his toe badly during an outdoor training session, badly enough that blood was gushing and skin was hanging. Bruce told him to stop. McQueen kept going. Bruce eventually said of McQueen, "Steve doesn't know the meaning of quitting." This was, from Bruce Lee, not a casual observation. It was the highest compliment he knew how to pay.
The dynamic between them was not simple. Bruce made no secret of the fact that he admired McQueen's career and wanted everything McQueen had. He said this to people. He said it without embarrassment. He was fascinated by McQueen's stardom in the specific way of someone who understood it as a target, a set of qualities and achievements that he intended to reach and eventually surpass. This was not uncomplicated for McQueen, who had not achieved what he had achieved by being comfortable with competition. Their friendship developed what Terrell called a professional sibling rivalry, the kind of rivalry that exists between people who know each other well enough to want to beat each other and who respect each other enough for the wanting to mean something. Bruce, for his part, offered what the transaction required. He taught McQueen Jeet Kune Do, the system he had spent years developing and testing, which he was teaching professionally at $100 an hour to clients who could afford it. He taught McQueen for free. As he explained to M. Uehara, "I teach Steve Jeet Kune Do and he gives me advice on acting. He doesn't try to convert me to his style of acting. He believes that each actor must create his own style. You can't learn that from anyone." This exchange, martial arts for acting guidance, describes the formal structure of what they were doing. It does not describe what was actually building between them. McQueen tried to give Bruce a Porsche. Bruce refused, not because he didn't want a Porsche, but because accepting it would have meant something about the relationship that he was not comfortable with. "I had to turn him down because I'd feel obligated," Bruce said, "but it was nice of him, and I sure appreciated it." McQueen tried to give him the down payment on a house. Bruce refused that, too, for the same reason. The refusing was its own kind of statement, a declaration that what was between them was not going to be organized around what one man could do for the other. McQueen also sent Bruce an autographed photograph of himself. The inscription read, "To Bruce Lee, one of my favorite fans." This was at the height of both their friendship and Bruce Lee's growing fame, a moment when the inscription's irony was visible to both of them. McQueen was teasing a man he knew had ambitions to surpass him. Bruce presumably understood this and found it funny, because the alternative interpretation, that McQueen genuinely believed Bruce Lee was his fan rather than his equal or his eventual superior, does not fit the McQueen that anyone who knew him described. The Mulholland Drive story is the most famous incident from their friendship, and it is entirely consistent with both men's characters. McQueen, knowing that Bruce was interested in buying a Porsche, took him for a drive on Mulholland Drive in his own car. He hit the curves at high speeds. He braked hard. He slid the car. He did everything that someone who genuinely loved driving fast would do on that road, and that any sane passenger would find terrifying.
Bruce Lee, who was afraid of nothing when the danger was human, found himself on the floor of the car holding on and shouting at his friend with a level of profanity that Polly quotes in full. "McQueen, you son of a bitch! McQueen, I bloody kill you!" And then, after McQueen had calmed him down, "I will never drive with you again, McQueen, never." He bought the Porsche anyway. When Bruce Lee received the opportunity he had spent 15 years working toward, Enter the Dragon, the Hollywood co-production that would make him globally famous, he was in a position to be magnanimous about what McQueen had given him. He had plans that included McQueen. One of them was The Silent Flute, a philosophical martial arts film that Bruce had been developing with James Coburn and screenwriter Sterling Siliphant. He wanted McQueen for it. McQueen declined. His reason, as reported, he didn't want to use his fame to make other people stars. This enraged Bruce, the familiar collision between two ambitious men who each needed things from the other that the other was not always willing to provide. Their friendship survived it. Most of their collisions did. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973. He was 32 years old. He had finished Enter the Dragon. The film would open 6 days after his death and make him the global icon he had spent his life working toward. He did not see any of it. He was gone. McQueen received the news in whatever way the news reached people in 1973 before instant global communication, telephone probably, from someone who had seen the reports coming out of Hong Kong. What he did next was the thing that defined, in retrospect, everything that had been built between them. He arranged to go to Seattle for the funeral. The people around him who knew about his relationship with funerals, who had watched him find reasons to avoid them throughout his adult life, understood immediately what this meant. He was not going because social obligation required it. He was going because Bruce Lee was his friend, in the complete and irreducible sense of that word, in the sense that survived the rivalry and the refusals and the Mulholland Drive incident and the disagreements about films and the professional jealousy and everything else that accumulates in a friendship between two ambitious, difficult men over 6 years.
He stood at the graveside at Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle. He helped carry the coffin. The other pallbearers were men from the center of Bruce's life. Taki Kimura, who had been one of Bruce's first American students and one of only 3 people Bruce had certified as a Jeet Kune Do instructor. Dan Inosanto, whose devotion to Bruce's system would continue for the rest of his life. James Coburn, who had trained with Bruce and had been developing the silent flute with him. Peter Chin, a family friend, and Bruce's brother, Robert. McQueen was among them. Steve McQueen, who hated funerals, who had spent his adult life finding reasons not to attend them, was carrying his friend's coffin on his shoulder in a cemetery in Seattle in July 1973. "I felt like saying goodbye to a friend," he said afterward. "That's why I went up there, to pay my respects and to try to make it easier on the people around him." The understatement in this, the quiet, contained quality of it, so different from the bravado that defined McQueen's public persona, says more about what Bruce Lee had meant to him than any larger statement could have. Steve McQueen died in November 1980 from pleural mesothelioma, most likely contracted from the asbestos racing suits he had worn for years. He was 50 years old. He had lived 7 years longer than Bruce Lee. In those 7 years, by multiple accounts, he did not replace what Bruce's death had taken from him, the specific companionship of someone who had understood his ambition and returned it in kind, who had trained with him and competed with him and refused each other's generosity and drove too fast on mountain roads and wrote letters and made each other angry and remained friends through all of it. One of them wanted what the other had. One of them tried to give the other things that could not be accepted. One of them sent a joking autograph to a man who intended to surpass him. One of them died first, at 32, in a city on the other side of the world. And the one who was left, the man who hated funerals, the most famous movie star in America, the man who had been too paranoid to want friendship until he wanted it enough to make an exception, got on a plane. He went to Seattle. He carried the coffin, and then he said, in the quiet, understated way of someone who had spent his life performing large emotions and reserved the real ones for private, "I felt like saying goodbye to a friend." That is what the friendship was. That sentence is all of it, compressed. Not a legend, not a rivalry, not a training partnership or a professional exchange or a Hollywood story. A friend. Someone McQueen had said goodbye to in a cemetery in Seattle in July 1973, in the only way he knew that was honest. If this story moved you, subscribe and leave a comment. Did you know Steve McQueen was one of Bruce Lee's pallbearers and what it meant for a man who hated funerals to be there? Share this video and tell us in the comments which detail of this friendship surprised you most.